Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Pilates Hour. Really excited to be back with you and talking about the side pull-up, one of my favorite exercises. Thanks, everybody, again for joining today. And yeah, we're talking about the side pull-up. And I mentioned it's one of my favorite exercises. I think it's a really kind of a cool, just little variation really to hamstring 3. And yet it's pretty challenging when you can't, when you haven't done it before and you can't really figure out where to put your body or what your orientation is to the chair. And I think that's probably the going up and down is not so difficult for people. That they can usually do pretty well, but it's really figuring out how to turn your body so that it is aligned with the top of the chair as opposed to being on the diagonal. And on the diagonal is, it's where people need to start. So I think it's absolutely fine if you're doing it that way and that's the best you can do it. That's okay. We've all got to start somewhere. And then as you refine the movement a little bit more, maybe gain just a little bit more mobility through your spine, a little bit more control and stability through the shoulder girdle, then you'll be able to turn the body. And so we'll chat a little bit, talk about some of the things that I think are important. And then I will go back to the chair and show you a few things that you can try on and see if it helps you. And I also love it when I inspire you to come up with even different things that help. So sometimes what I've discovered that's really helpful for me or for my clients, you might see that and you think, well, I'm going to try something different and see if that works. And if it does, great. I think that's wonderful because we really do have to listen to our bodies, listen to our clientele, listen to, the things that they're saying, but also the things that they're saying more with their bodies. So that's what I hope always with these exercise breakdown. It inspires you to try out what I like and what works for me, and also to be curious and try some other different things that work for you and work for your clients. So as I mentioned, this really is it's a variation of hamstring 3. And hamstring 3 is standing facing the chair with the hands on top and doing elephant or inverted V, coming up and down in that way. And again, I'll show it so that everybody is familiar because not all the names are the same. So going up and down that way. And then we turn, and instead of facing the chair, we face the side of the chair. And herein is a little bit of the challenge. So I thought, well, what exercises will really help somebody, not just to understand the movement, but to really change how their body is, either with mobility or with strength. Again, we need different things at different parts of the body at different times of movement. So how are we going to put our bodies into the shape of these two exercises early on and develop the mobility, the awareness, and potentially the strength that we need by the time that we're doing an exercise like this? And I really think that it's really incumbent upon us as teachers to, with any exercise, really start thinking bigger, right? They have that phrase of big, hairy, audacious goals, right? What are some big, hairy, audacious exercise goals that we have for our clients? Things that we could never really imagine them doing on the first day or the first month or first year, some of them. But we want to be able to plan to get there, and we need to start small and continually be giving the nervous system and all the tissues the load and the kind of the stimulation to develop to be able to do it. And when we do that, when I've done that in the past, it really, it's like all of a sudden this person can do this fairly challenging exercise a lot sooner than I thought they could, right? Or somebody who I thought, well, I don't even know why I'm bothering. They're never going to be able to do this exercise. But when I really take the steps to prepare the body from day one, they get there and they can do it because they've now conditioned their tissues. They are a little stronger, a little more mobile, a little more aware, and then they can end up doing these exercises. I was thinking of spine stretch and saw, but also thinking about the little bit of rotation that's needed. And we're going to talk about how the rotation comes into this exercise, because it's probably a little bit in a different place. If you've not really thought about it, you might think, well, wait a second, where is the rotation? So things like spine twist. Yes, Kelly, good. And then also exercises that just create the same shape. So elephant, right? Elephant is one we do quite frequently with clients. So elephant, there's a little bit, we're not really going into side bending, but there is from the shoulder down through the body and through to the legs, there is a little bit of a side curve. So I was thinking of something like mermaid, but then even more like Cleopatra, right? Cleopatra has not only the spine mobility into lateral flexion, but it also incorporates the low part of the spine into the pelvis. So that's another one that I think is really helpful. Let's see what other people are writing. So the twist, sure. Part of the twist would help, definitely, Flavi. Hello, Flavi. Other related ones, hamstring 1, hamstring 2, right? Or you might know them as washerwoman. So standing in front of the chair, pushing down like a standing roll down into the spine stretch position, or reaching across the chair. Now, there's a little bit more of a dynamic feeling when we're standing behind the chair and reaching over for hamstring 2. So I think that's important in terms of just general awareness and how we're supporting our bodies. Kneeling cat on the chair, I think, is one that is really interesting because it, again, gets us into that same type of position. I see some more things here. Side to side. Yeah, side to side could, because we're getting a little bit of rotation into the body. That would work. Those of you that know teaser on the chair is, again, in this more of that kind of spine stretch position, sitting down on the floor, feet up, hands on the pedals. So I thought that would, and then really any of the rollover exercises that we have, also are part of it. Rollover, corkscrew, some of those movements are really important as well. But the one, again, that it's the most related to really is hamstring 3. And so things that for me made a difference when I was learning how to do both hamstring 3 and later on how to do side pull-up was the timing and also the cueing. So one of the very common cues that we hear people talk about, it's said in class often, is to get the pelvis to come up, or even the sit bones. Aim the sit bones up, aim the tailbone up. And those cues are fine. But what are they going to promote? What do those cues in this pulling up motion, what is that going to promote? Well, for me, it promotes hip flexion. And we're trying to stay in spine flexion. So the faster someone comes up, the more that I think, oh, I'm going to really aim my tailbone or my sit bones up to the corner of the room. Now I've just created a situation where I'm no longer in spine flexion. I'm now in hip flexion. Great if you want to do it in hip flexion with a long spine. Maybe you have somebody with low bone density. That might be a wonderful cue. And this just shows again how, and I still get questions of what's the one cue? We did a Pilates hour on it a few times ago. What's the one right cue? It's like, there really isn't one, except for in that moment with that person. But that might be great. So I've got to find out a different way. I can't really aim my pelvis up. I've got to come up with a different way to talk about the shape of the spine. So I will often cue the lower rib cage area or the lower back, and I'll usually just put my hand, right, the lower ribs or the lower back. And it's like, keep lifting up into my hand, and I'll put my hand there. And it takes a second, it takes a moment for people, if they're not used to that, to figure out what to do. So this is where you might go back into something like hamstring one, where now they don't have to worry about balancing or lifting anything. They're pushing down and getting support from the springs. And you can start to bring an awareness to that part of the body as they're moving. So the next time that you teach something like hamstring one is a perfect example, or just a standing roll down, even in a mat class, is bring some awareness to the lower rib cage and the lower back so that we really get full spine flexion, and we're not just in thoracic flexion, which is where we often are, because we do that really well. If you've taken any classes with me before, and I've taught just the basic cat and horse, or however you like to call it, we do a lot of thoracic flexion and we do a lot of lumbar extension because we can. It's easy, right? For most of us to do that. It's like the path of least resistance. And we want to challenge people to move in places and move in ways that they can't necessarily do right now, because if they could do all the things we needed them to do in a Pilates session or in their daily lives, they wouldn't need to come to us, right? We wouldn't have anything to teach them. So it's going beyond. And I think it's also really important that we stick with it for a little bit. Some of the more challenging exercises, and you could insert the name of any exercise that you find challenging or your clients find challenging, is it's not going to happen on the first time for everybody. Some it will, some it won't. And it's that constant staying with it where we're really starting to create change. Brent talks so much about load and how we can use load, less load, more load to provide something for the body so that we make progress, right? If we keep just doing the same thing, we never do anything else but that same thing. So we want to challenge with more spring tension, less spring tension, right? Depending on the exercise. Do you need more help right now, or do you need less help right now? And so constantly playing with that within all of the movements. So that really goes for really any exercise. And if we stay at that, we really are dedicated to that in our practice. And this is what makes home exercises so important, right? It's not just, oh, go do this and go do that, and I'll see you next week. But really be thoughtful when you're giving home exercises that it really speaks to the activity that the person wants to participate in, right? What do they want to do? And also it can relate to things that you want to do in the studio, like an exercise that you are working on together with your client. Make sure that you are really giving them movements for home that support what they want to do, right? So whether it's their activity or it's some cool exercise you're working on in the studio, make sure that your home exercises really are speaking to those things, because it will make the progress so much faster and so much easier. You'll still probably get there if they're not doing their home program, or you're not giving them really the ideal exercises. It's just going to take a lot longer. So we want to move people along so that we're progressing and changing and being spontaneous as much as we can. All right, let me just take a look and see if there are any other things I want to talk about before we go on to the chair. I think we're good. I'll come back to my notes in a moment and just make sure I haven't missed anything. So I'm going to go back to the chair and start with some preparations that can help with the side pull-up exercise, and then show with hamstring 3 the ways that we can get there, and then eventually wrap it all up and come into side pull-up. If you have a chair where you are, if you're in a Pilates studio, you're welcome to try this with me. Even just having a bench or something to play with some of the body positions could be helpful. So get creative and see how it goes. So I have a couple of yoga blocks, and you could also use a moon box. You could use, different studios have different boxes and different things. So find something that either fits inside, and you can see I have the pedals down, so I didn't put them up yet, so that you can stand on it. You've also seen me in other Pilates hours put things under the pedals. So you could do the same thing with yoga blocks under the pedals, or a thicker foam roller or a moon box. Just always be careful that whatever you put under there, it doesn't slide when you push the pedals down on top of it. And also that you don't put something under any pieces of metal where when you push down, it's going to put a dent or something in the box or in the upholstery. That would be horrible. So just be mindful of how you're using these things. So I just have 2 blocks I'm going to put down. And this is going to allow me, and I'm just showing this now so I don't have to put the springs on and off later. This is how I can get into the position and not have to work very hard. So I can step up now, and I'm standing just inside the chair, and the pedals would be a little bit higher at this point, but it's fine for just getting the feeling of what's going to happen. As you know, when people go on the first time, they're a little bit more on the diagonal. So I'm really aligned with my hand here, but back on the inside of the chair. So I'm more on the diagonal. Where I want to be is aligned this way. So I talk a lot about my collarbones being aligned with the side edge of the chair. And I can be here and feel the leaning in. I can even practice lifting and lowering my leg, which is part of it. And I can understand this is where I'm working toward. This is probably where I'll start. And again, that's fine. As I am better able to do it, I want to get all the way around so that I'm aligned here. And I have the chair quite close to the wall just for filming purposes. But I will often have people stand just right here behind the chair on the side and lean over. So their nervous system, their eyes, their body, it already now knows how to get around into the position so that they have something to aim for, right? If you don't know where you're going, how do you know when you get there? How do you know where to go? So even though they may not be able to actively get in that position, I've set it up so the nervous system understands, right? We have something to aim for. And then I can visit this every once in a while if I need to. Let's try it one more time without the pedals, get on, have the feeling of it, and then go from there. So that's one way you can, again, it seems kind of basic, but it is amazing how useful it is to just put the body in the position without any work or any load or anything. Yeah. All right. So I put on the heaviest springs up at the top, certainly adjust for your own body, but it's nice in the beginning, especially on hamstring 3, to give a little oomph, right? It's helpful for people to feel like the pedals are helping them to come up into the position. And as you remember, when you first did it, or when you teach it to somebody for the first time, there is a moment of, how do I do this? How do I get this thing to lift up? And that is, again, transferring weight. So thinking about exercises where you're doing just regular quadruped exercises in a mat class, making sure that you're doing things that come into a plank in a mat class, right? So you're increasing the amount of load through the upper extremities. Exercises that do, shoulder flexion extension, On the reformer, things like reverse abdominals, the quadruped exercise, knee stretch exercise, right? Where we focus a lot on the legs moving. Make sure you're focusing on the arm movement so that you start to really load the shoulder in this forward position. Fast forward, now we're ready, right, for hamstring 3. We've done other inverted V and long stretch exercises on the reformer and in other places. And now, here's one of the things that I want you to try when you start going into this exercise, especially if you've done it a lot. What I often see is the heels lift up straight away into a very high demi-point or heel lifted position, and lots of tension in the legs, which I don't know is really necessary for everybody. So allow the heels just to be down a little bit. You don't have to push them down, but just let them stay down. Shift the weight and pretend like the pedals are going to stay down. They're not going to come up. And as you lean forward, there's the moment of lifting up through the lower ribs and the lower back. And I go up as high as I can comfortably and then back down. Okay. If you're used to doing it with your heels lifted, this is going to feel very strange, very odd, and that's okay. And if you really prefer to do it with your heels up, you like to do it in turnout, go for it. That's totally fine. Just remember that for some clients, this will actually help them understand the movement a little bit more, and it takes on less of this. So here's the sit bones to the ceiling, right? And I'm just up and down and up and down, and I'm flexing my hips, but I'm not really flexing my spine. So when I think leave my legs behind as I'm rounding, now my body takes on a little different shape. And I feel more work throughout my trunk, right? When I just do the up and down, I don't feel very much of anything. I feel the movement, but I don't feel much work. And I think people have mistaken the don't cue abdominal muscles or don't cue muscles at all with we don't want to feel our muscles working or acknowledge that they're working. They absolutely are, right? And that's why I'm doing this movement. But I'm not going to say tighten your abdominals, right? I'm going to cue other ways to facilitate the muscles working the way that they should. Okay, so this will be last hamstring 3. So again, for me, I like the heels to stay a little bit low, shift the weight a bit forward, and start to change the body. If I had more hands, I could cue myself this feeling of lifting through the center here at the area of the lowest ribs to come up and then come back down. Okay. So lots of variations, lots of things you can do there to get to that point. So again, just heels low and leave the pedals behind. Feel almost like you're going to lift the pedals up by moving your body. Takes a little bit to get into it, but you'll feel the difference when you try it that way. All right. And again, it's not the only way, but it is a good way to get more spine flexion if that's what you're wanting. So I'm gonna come back because I think there's a couple of questions. Good question. How would you spot somebody? A few different ways. Sometimes I feel like I'm doing like, keeping them there. Where I think I am the most frequently is standing to the side of the chair with one hand on their shoulder and one hand ready to cue, right? I could cue to lift the ribs. I could put my hand on the back. I could help the pelvis stay a little bit more rounded as opposed to sit bones up. And I'm also in the place where if I needed to, I could get my foot onto the pedal. Now I don't want to, and I'm actually really glad you asked this question about chair safety. I do see a little bit where teachers are cueing exercises on the chair where the chair pedals are supporting the body in some way, right? Could be hands or feet. And to stop the exercise, I've seen the teachers push the chair pedals all the way to the floor. You've completely taken away any support that that person was receiving from the pedals. So be really careful that I never say never. I just can't think of many times that I would ever do that. I'm sure it might happen, but allow the client to put the pedal down, right, where it's touching the wooden platform. Then you can put your foot on it, right? So just be really mindful of that. Especially on things like Swan, where you're lying over the top and your hands are on the pedals. And it's like, okay, the exercise is over, and the teacher pushes the pedals away from the hands. So that's probably where I would stand, because I have the most access to the shoulder girdle, the body, and then the pedals if needed, right? Or I could stand at the person's head. And that's another place, especially if they were fearful of going too fast and not being able to support their body, right? So I could stand at their head and shoulders, and that would also be an okay place to stand. So those would be my two, my two places. All right, I hope that answers your question. So let's see. Leave the legs behind. Good. I'm glad that that's working for you, Christine. It's kind of weird, but I don't do many things that are, everything I do is a little bit weird, because I feel like it's so empowering to change how we're working. So, all right. So I'm going to go back and let's now look at the actual movement of side pull-up. So again, in thinking of safety and just kind of good etiquette, get on the chair, whether you're doing forward lunge, side lunge, any type of step up, or you're doing hamstring 3 or side pull up, get on facing the chair where you have your hands here if needed. You've got complete control of the pedals, and then you can change your orientation. Now, when you turn, there's a lot of question about which foot goes in the front. Should my feet be flat? Should my heels be lifted? Should I be turned out? Should my feet be together? Should my feet be apart? Yes, whatever works for you is fine. What I've been playing around with a little bit, I like to turn and keep the 2 feet on their pedals. So I'm facing here, I've got 1 foot on one pedal, 1 foot on the other. And as I turn, my feet are oriented that way. And then I do sometimes, if I'm going to stay in the staggered stance, I will lift my heels up a little bit, but I'm facing to the right of the chair and my right leg is in front. And as I turn to face the other way, my left leg would be in the front. What I've been playing with, though, is putting the foot flat, because the next variation that we're going to do, once we can do this, is to lift the leg out to the side. So it kind of takes on the feeling of the star a little bit. So we're doing a single leg variation. And so what I've started doing is bringing the feet together. Now this foot out here is not touching anything really. It's just kind of next to the other foot. So it's not, there's no pedal to push on. And I'm using the connection of the inner thighs, and not, again, I'm not squeezing my inner thighs. I'm just, it's already naturally going to happen that as I go into my movement, my legs will engage a little bit. And for some people, that is helpful. And you can, again, depending on the shape of your pedals, you could have this foot, so for me, my left foot, a little, just slightly inside of the pedal. And then this foot, as I come up, can touch the edge of the pedal here too. So I can get some contact of that foot up and down. Then it's ready. You're already in the position to lift the leg once you get up into the movement. Okay, so that's just some things to think about. But right now, I'm not so concerned about the legs. Do what works for you. But one of the things we talked about earlier is being diagonal to the chair as opposed to being along this long line at the top of the chair. And so one of the things we can add in is the idea, don't just don't just have your client lift their hand up, but the idea or the feeling of lifting this hand. So as I'm here and I start to go, and I'm leaning on the chair, I'm not going anywhere yet. But as I'm here, I want to get in a position where I can unweight my right hand, which is on the pedal side of the top of the chair. So as I'm there, my body has to shift over to this arm. If I'm here, a lot of my weight is on my right arm and I can't lift it. Okay, so again, this is not to actually lift the arm up. You can do a single arm version, but it is more if you were going to lift your arm, what would that cause in your body? And for most people, if they think about lifting or unweighting this hand a little bit, it will change them from here to here, right? And now my weight is on this arm. I am single arm, and then I can put it back down, right? And again, I'm leaning on the chair so that I can stay there and talk for a little bit. And if your clients are happy doing that, they can do that as well. So they can lean into it a little bit and just practice there. And that's where you could take the moon boxes or something and put under the pedals. So the pedals are maybe this high, maybe a little higher, and they can actually just get on and stand down on the pedal and play around with the position, similar to what I showed in the beginning about having the yoga blocks down there. So that's one of the things that I think will really help. Now, where do you practice that so that, again, clients can start to understand this? Flavie had offered earlier when I was just talking about related exercises, the twist from the mat work, right? So the side plank, sit down into the twist and come back up. That's a great exercise as a mat exercise to start practicing loading just one arm, right? We do have two hands on the chair, so it's not like we have to do it single arm, but if you can get into that position and have the sensation of being strong enough, right, that you trust your body to stay in that position, then you have the capacity to do it right away. If you've never had that feeling, then it's challenging, right? And it's scary. I don't know how many clients say to me, it's like, wow, I don't think I'm strong enough, or I've never done that before. And sometimes they might not really be quite strong enough to do it. That's why we're talking about all these preparations. But eventually they really are. And then it becomes trust, right? Do I trust my body in a position, especially where I have these heavy springs pushing up under my feet? So it can be a little bit precarious, a little bit nervous in the beginning. And back to, I don't remember who asked the question about spotting, but again, I'm standing somewhere here, right? When they're first going, because if they did lose their balance a little bit, I could help them there. That would be easy. Once somebody's going, then I tend to stand back. If my wall wasn't so close here, I'd stand a little bit back of me, because then I can very gently give some information to the pelvis. And I underline, underline and highlight very gently, because especially in this balanced position with two hands here and one foot and a heavily sprung pedal, if you give too much pushing or moving, or you might knock somebody off balance. So my cueing then becomes, instead of pushing on the pelvis, I might put my hand on this side of the pelvis or the rib cage and say, move toward my hand, move in this direction. Or I will gently brush the rib cage. So if the body is going toward this diagonal, I might take my hand up high here, down low on this side, and just do a little brush of, see if you can move this direction. And then they do it on their own. So again, in thinking of letting the client be independent with their own balance, that's another thing that's quite important on any of these exercises, that we're offering information, but we're not moving them or pushing them where they aren't really in control. So just to think about that. So go just one more time. So facing forward, turning, keep the feet if you like them staggered, or bring them to the more side by side position. Already I'm thinking about getting my body over here, and this is in this little part here, where the lengthening from my ribs down to my hip, I mentioned Cleopatra. This is where that position comes in really handy, that little bit of extra length there. And then I come up. So I talked about where the rotation is. So where is the rotation in my body, and where is the rotation within the movement? Let's see what you think. I'll look in the chat, see what you think. If Jenia is talking about the lower chest, so yeah, the lower rib cage. Yes, so that's really where the rotation is happening. Where is it happening within the movement? Is there more rotation when my body is up? Or is there more rotation when my body is down? What do you think? Yes, lower thoracic. I'm seeing a few people put in this kind of lower rib cage, lower thoracic area. That's where the bulk of the movement is. Yeah. Oh, now everybody's answering. I've got it. So yes, on the way down, the more I come up, the more my body de-rotates or unrotates. If I could come up even higher, my feet would come almost all the way up onto the top of the chair if we had a different style of chair, and I wouldn't really be in rotation at all. But the more I push the pedals down, the more my body twists as I come down. So it's less rotation, more rotation. And you'll really feel that when you're squared off. You won't feel it when you're on the diagonal. You'll just feel up and down, and I don't know, maybe that's why people do so many rotation variations in hamstring 3, is maybe they're not feeling it in hamstring in side pull-up as they want to do more rotation. So maybe that's why it happens. I don't know. That's kind of my thought on it. Let's see what else is happening here. Good. Yeah. So right. So lower rib cage is where it is. If I was going to do one arm, what would it feel like? Well, I did. So it feels like the single arm for me, a really good, like a good amount of work in my whole kind of rib cage and shoulder area. And so when I'm weight bearing on this arm, I'm feeling my whole kind of rib cage, chest, and shoulder, because now I have to shift over. So like some of my chest, some of my back, around my shoulder, that's really what I feel. And it feels strong, it feels powerful. Some people feel like they have a really big stretch, and that's why I mentioned exercises like Cleopatra or mermaid, even the side bend from the mat work. So the side plank going into the side bend, both upward and downward, are also really nice preparations just for those, the side body tissues. That would be a good preparation. So yeah, those would be the things that's what I feel, but everybody's different. So we'll see what you feel. So there is a question. Is it wrong to have them come up with the feet staggered? Absolutely not. I really am trying to stay away from right and wrong. And there are moments like if I say I'm going to do side pull up and I do side arm twist, that's wrong, right? If I say I'm going to do something or I'm intending to do something and I don't do that, whatever it is that I'm intending to do, that's wrong, I guess you could say that. But there are so many different bodies and so many different ways that we need to do certain things. Just looking again at the body proportions, right? People who have a longer torso and maybe shorter legs, or they have an equally long torso and legs. Somebody who's very tall and they're both their torso and their legs are quite long, but they're more symmetrical versus somebody who has really, really long legs and a shorter torso. That does affect how we kind of fit into all of these movements. And that's why sometimes the roll up and the rollover are not the same level of difficulty for somebody. Like for if I'm not warmed up and I'm not been practicing much, I can do a rollover. It's not going to be super smooth and pretty, but I can do a rollover much easier than I can do a roll up. And there are people that have just the opposite experience. They could do a roll up all day long, and whatever reason, their rollover is not as easy for them. So I don't think it's wrong to really do any of these things if you're accomplishing what you want. So if the form is good, the spine is flexed, their orientation to the chair is spot on, I don't care at all about the leg position. I only care about things like that when it starts to be a detriment to the movement. I'm not getting what I want out of the movement. Then I'm looking for things to change because we can, right? It doesn't take away from the exercise. I'm trying to build the experience into the exercise. And I think that comes from working with so many people when I was very first young Pilates teacher. I worked in Brent's physical therapy practice along with my colleague and friend Jill, and people had spinal cord injuries, they had different traumatic brain injuries, they had amputations, they had chronic low back pain, they had, you know, multiple sclerosis, all kinds of things that we would see in the Pilates, in the physical therapy clinic. And our goal was to give people the experience of the exercise. We kind of generalize, okay, what are the goals? What are the benefits? And what do we get out of something like the 100? And how do I give a similar experience to somebody who maybe has a spinal cord injury or something very basic like osteoporosis? How do I give somebody the same experience of rolling up when I'm not going to have them roll up? How creative can I get so that everybody feels like they're getting the thing out of that exercise, right? As much as I can. So I think that's why I'm so quick to make changes like that. So great question. Let's see. Yes, Elena. If a client feels a muscle spasm under the lower ribs on the side, what can that indicate? Mostly, to me, it indicates they've probably never been in this position or done something like this before, and it's kind of natural. We've all had those moments where it's like, oh my goodness, what was that? And we're probably using the muscles maybe a little bit more than we need to. We're not really efficient yet, or it's an area where we just haven't used it in that way. It might be on more of a stretch or a little bit more compressed. So it's normal. I would say don't keep doing it if it's really cramped or spasmed. But look at, do you think if they had a little bit more mobility, would they do okay? So maybe that's where you do some things that lengthen the side a bit, and try to find some exercises that are similar, but not quite as demanding. Maybe hamstring 3 facing the chair with some rotation, like moving the arms or moving the lower body. And that might help to just get those tissues a little bit more used to that, I think would be what I think. I don't think it's anything serious, but yeah, so just make sure you're working with them, and then go back and try it again. And I bet they'll be able to do it. Let's see, would saw on the mat and seated push through with rotation also be good preps? Great preps. Yes. Saw, if you're really working on rotation, I think we've gotten a little lost in saw of the only thing we can think of sometimes is to talk about the finger sawing off the toe. I think we can let that go. Yes, that was original, it was talked about, but it doesn't really help people do the exercise better. And so if we can think about really getting a good spine stretch and having rotation and not just trying to reach over and bounce at our toe, I think we'll do better. And that is a great exercise. And both push through, plain push through, seated with the tower bar, and some of the circumduction movement, the circular movement would also be excellent for that. Um, Anything that puts the body in a similar position is helpful. Then you do have to make sure that you are starting to put the body in the same orientation to the equipment or to gravity as the task that you want them to do. And this is why, and I know that when I listen to Brent doing some of his case study Pilates hours, and he'll talk about exercises and what do we start with versus what are we working toward. And we do start with exercises. We refer to it as a foreign environment. So if I wanted to work on somebody's running or jumping or something like that, I might put them lying supine on the reformer and do a lot of work there in the beginning if they need that. Maybe the load of gravity is too much, or maybe they don't have very good balance and they can do more lying down because we don't have to worry about them falling. But eventually, even if I just start there for a little bit of time, I need to get the person up into their orientation to gravity. So just thinking about that in our exercises, that it's functional when it is in the functional realm of that exercise or that movement pattern. So lying down is a good prep for things when needed. And it is definitely part of our Pilates programming. We're lying supine, then eventually we get up to seated and kneeling, and then we're up to standing, and we're on out the door. But make sure that you really are thinking about the functional things, eventually getting to the way they are really performed. And Juan mentioned this a couple of weeks ago in his webinar, that he doesn't do much training lying down anymore. He does a lot of his training up and in the orientation. But again, we have to make that decision for our clients. And there's nothing wrong with lying down and doing the movements, but don't expect that there's going to be just a natural carryover. We've got to build that in and rehearse it in the position that they're often in. Good questions. Yeah, there were definitely more exercises than I listed in the beginning, for sure. And just good plain old push-ups and things like that are great conditioning. And if you can't do a push-up on the feet, do a push-up on your knees. And if you can't do it there, put your hands on the edge of the trap table and do it on your kitchen counter, or lie down and grab some heavy weights and do some bench press type motions with some dumbbells. Do anything that gets you moving. And I will say, and has nothing to do with this, today's not about push-ups, but just remembering that push-up is kind of like a squat, right? In your legs, now we have it in your arms. And make sure that you're really working on mobility in the shoulder, mobility in the elbow, and not that you have to work on elbow mobility, but make sure that you are promoting the bending at both of these joints. I see sometimes people doing push-ups and it's as if they don't want to bend their arms, which I know sounds kind of strange, but make sure that, and that's why I do a lot of push-up motion without, like, we just do it at the beginning of a mat class and we just do this motion so that people feel, oh yeah, I can bend at my shoulder and at my elbow, I can get to here and push, and I can mimic that when I get into weight bearing. So, and that's another place where some muscle cueing might not serve very well because we're really, there's too much stability And we really need to have more mobility through the shoulder joint, through the elbow, through even the shoulder blades have to have a little bit of movement to them, so that we have good shoulder alignment. All right, let me see what's else happening in here in the chat. Oh yeah, Julie mentioned lateral flexion on the chair, and that's another great one. Another wonderful related exercise where you're side lying on the chair, hand on the pedal, coming up into lateral flexion. You're going to get the elongation from the ribs and then all the way into the hip. So that's also a nice exercise to go into. And also another exercise that I know is not in our general curriculum is side body twist. And that's another great one. Maybe we'll do something in the future on side body twist. And that's where you're in that side lying position on the chair, but both hands are on the pedals. So that might be a good topic for future Pilates hours. Good. And let me see if there's anything else. So I don't think there's any more questions. So I hope you guys have found a new appreciation. Maybe if this wasn't your favorite exercise, or you avoided it with clients, or you avoid it with yourself, that there are some steps that you can take to get into it. You can, gradually get yourself there and start to load the body, start to load the arms, getting closer to single arm work. Maybe another, I was just thinking of down stretch on the reformer with a single arm. That also would be a great, just building up the endurance to be there. Leave the legs behind on hamstring 3, on side pull up, and the opposite when you're doing things like hamstring 1 and hamstring 2, you're still going to delay the pedals, but now your hands are on them. And so coming up really quick, now see if you can leave behind, and then you've got that sense of opposition, you've got the body traveling in 2 different ways, and see if that helps a little bit. Those are good ideas. And then, get your cueing in order, put things under the pedals so that people can feel the position before they're really having to control all of the springs, and have fun with it and smile. And, sometimes you won't accomplish it on the first try, but that's okay. And also just remember too, just in closing, of if you know it's supposed to be a certain way, any exercise, and the person really is doing the best that they can do, just let them enjoy what they're doing. I sometimes hear a little too much nitpicking about getting it perfect. If you know they're doing the best that they can do, celebrate that. Make small changes as you go on, but really celebrate that. So thank you everybody again for joining. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. And we will see you next time on the Pilates Hour.